Let's turn now to a former U.S. ambassador for his thoughts on how far the turmoil in Egypt could spread. Daniel Kurtzer was ambassador to Egypt under President Bill Clinton and then ambassador to Israel under President George W. Bush. He's now a professor of Middle Eastern policy studies at Princeton University. Welcome, Ambassador Kurtzer. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me start by asking you about the spread that we're looking at, the possibility. I mean, we are seeing protests in other countries. We are seeing demands from people for resignations of top politicians. Do you think that we're going to see this as serious as we see it in Cairo, in other places like Jordan?
Well, there's certainly concern. I think the fact that the King of Jordan chose to try to get ahead of the curve by changing his cabinet and charging them with reform measures suggests very strongly that he fears a kind of carryover effect from Egypt. We've already seen it in Yemen, where the population is out in the streets, and it could happen elsewhere as well. So I think rulers in the region would be well advised, as the King of Jordan has done, to see what they can do before they face the kind of pressures from the street that we've seen this week in Cairo.
Ambassador Kurtzer, great to have you here with Matt and myself. I guess we're watching this situation. I mean, is this a historic moment? Matt, I think, so appropriately puts it, as he has over the last couple of days, about is this the Middle East's Berlin Wall moment? Is it? I mean, is this going to be very significant in terms of changes in what happens in the Middle East going forward?
Well, Carol, it's an extraordinarily important moment for Egypt. For 58 years, the Egyptian government and system has operated in one manner, and we're now seeing that the government, the regime, will have to be responsive to an opposition of disparate elements in order to proceed. Now, one needs to remember that even in this crisis, the army will ultimately be the arbiter of power. But as was indicated in the Army's decision, President Mubarak's decision not to fire on the demonstrators, I think there's a recognition that life as they previously knew it in Egypt is changing. Whether or not this has the kind of demonstration effect in the rest of the region is a story yet to unfold. We talked a moment ago about the problems that Jordan faces. It's quite possible that in each country there will be a quite different reaction. Should problems happen in Syria, for example, one could imagine a much earlier decision by the regime to crack down with force. But for Egypt, this is a monumental historic change, and one whose final outcome is not yet known.
Ambassador, we have talked to guests over the last few days who have said this is a result of anger that's been simmering for a good 18 years under Mubarak's reign here. The corruption all the way at the top, from jailing political opponents down to the very lower levels. The police officers murdered a young Alexandrian named Khalid Saeed last year. Is there the possibility that no matter what, we don't come out looking good in the end here? We have been supporting this dictator, and if they have free and fair elections, won't the Egyptian people be able to speak out about the unhappiness with the U.S. supporting this brutal regime?
Well, Matt, I think the likely outcome here will assure that the United States will maintain a relationship. If indeed the Army remains as pivotal as it has been for the last 6 decades, even into the future, then I don't see any dramatic or fundamental change. On the other hand, there have been grievances during these past 30 years, which the United States has tried to deal with both quietly, but also in some of our public statements, in our human rights reports, in our public diplomacy. It's a very hard challenge for a superpower to have to deal with interests that are conflicting. And when you have the hard interests of the peace process, security and intelligence cooperation weighed off against the imperative and the values of democracy, it's a tough choice for any administration.
We talked with former Secretary of State and Presidential Advisor Henry Kissinger earlier on Bloomberg Television. He said he would talk, his advice, I would talk as little publicly as possible because we don't really know what's going on. That was his advice. You agree with him that until we really have a true understanding of the situation, it's better for the U.S. administration to be quiet here?
Well, frankly, I don't think we have the luxury of not saying what we need to say. The administration, I think, has done a very admirable job of trying to find the right tone and the right content, which suggests that we continue to support a strong relationship with Egypt, but we also would like to see Egypt undergoing reform. There's been some recalibration of that message over the past few days, but I think the administration has found the right tone and content. You know, the world looks to the United States to speak on these matters. I agree with Secretary Kissinger that we shouldn't presume to define what happens in Egypt, but the world does wait to hear what the United States thinks about events in Egypt.
Are you concerned that if we see elections here, Ambassador, and more radical groups win, we could see sort of the same thing happen that happened when the Shah came down and was eventually replaced by radical Ayatollahs?
Well, the situation is different enough that we may have a little bit of confidence that it won't be the same. After all, it was the organized Muslim opposition to the Shah that was operating outside and inside the country that helped topple him. You have a different set of factors here. But I think we do need to be concerned about the possibility that groups within the Islamic extremist movement may try to hijack any kind of political change and reorient it towards their own goals. Egypt itself is a very religious society, so the question here is not Egypt as a Muslim state or even as a religious Muslim state, but the degree to which extremist elements try to take over this process and, in fact, take over the country.
We're seeing Nobel Peace Prize winner, a Nobel Peace Prize winner take sort of the lead role in front of the Muslim Brotherhood. But is the Muslim Brotherhood a radical group? I mean, Hamas is a shoot-off of the Muslim Brotherhood, right?
Yeah, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood, since its founding in 1928, has had one goal and one goal only, and that is to establish an Islamic State in Egypt as a precursor to an Islamic State throughout the region. They are very flexible on tactics, and I think we need to be careful not to mistake their tactical flexibility for their long-term strategic goals. The Egyptian people, as religious as they are, have not flocked to support the Muslim Brotherhood, and I don't think there has to be an expectation that some kind of a successor government needs to include the Muslim Brotherhood. It can't be anti-Islam, of course, and it may include people who are religious. It should include people who are religious or non-religious, but I'm not sure that I would want to see an organized Islamic extremist opposition be brought into that government.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Kurtzer. Ambassador Daniel Kurtzer there, former ambassador to Egypt and then to Israel after that. All right.